What if I told you that one of the fashion world's most influential women, someone who built her career championing powerful voices, diverse perspectives, and modern cultural storytelling, finally said enough to Meghan Markle? What if I told you that behind the glossy covers, behind the glamorous lighting setups, behind the curated Instagram posts, there was a moment so explosive, so unexpected, so deeply embarrassing for everyone involved, that Harper's Bazaar's editor-in-chief Samira Nasser allegedly made the rarest decision in the fashion industry, quietly blacklisting a global celebrity? And what if I told you this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment reaction, but the result of a long, simmering frustration that finally boiled over the moment Meghan Markle refused something as simple, yet essential, as a photographer's direction? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You have to ask yourself, when does a star stop being a star and start becoming a liability? The story you're about to hear isn't just another celebrity drama. It isn't another headline about Meghan being difficult. It isn't another anonymous insider complaining about attitude. No, this one digs deeper. This one reveals a turning point in the industry. Because the fashion world is not emotional. It is strategic. It is image-driven. It is collaborative. And when that collaboration collapses, when someone pushes too hard, demands too much, or refuses to play by the rules, the consequences can be swift, quiet, and irreversible. Let's be honest, Meghan Markle has always been polarizing. She's been praised as a trailblazer and criticized as a diva. She's been celebrated for breaking the mold and accused of manipulating narratives. But even with all the speculation, all the debates, all the chatter, very few stories cut through the noise. Very few stories have the industry murmuring behind closed doors. Very few stories have editors, stylists, photographers, and producers looking at one another with the same expression, that mix of exhaustion and disbelief that says, "We can't do this again." And yet, that is exactly what happened. Imagine the room. The bright white lights overhead. Assistants running cables along the floor. Stylists steaming a designer trench coat only minutes before the shot. Makeup artists doing final touch-ups on Meghan's skin, smoothing, refining, contouring, sculpting. Photographers checking their lenses, adjusting their settings, setting up the perfect frame. The energy buzzing with expectation because, after all, this is Meghan Markle, a person who commands media attention with every step. This should have been a career highlight for some of these creatives. A moment to remember, a memory to brag about, a special line on the resume. But something was off from the moment she walked into the studio. Have you ever entered a room and instantly sensed tension that nobody dared acknowledge out loud? That was the energy. You could practically hear the inhale everyone took, a silent one, as if preparing for something unpredictable. A presence entered before Meghan even said a word. The kind of presence that reminds you of stories whispered during Fashion Week parties or rumors traded over late-night cocktails. Be careful. She can be difficult, but no one wanted to believe it. Not yet. Not until the cameras started rolling. Not until the directions began. Not until the friction became undeniable. Let me ask you this. What do you think happens when a photographer, whose entire job depends on capturing the perfect shot, gives a simple cue, and the subject refuses to follow? Do they adapt? Do they push harder? Do they swallow their frustration because it's a high-profile figure? Or does something crack? Because on this day, that crack was loud. The first direction seemed harmless. A small angle adjustment. A tilt of the shoulder. A subtle reposition for lighting. A request so basic that even non-models comply instinctively. But Meghan didn't. She refused. Calmly at first. Then sharply. Then repeatedly. And each refusal, each no, each not that angle, each this doesn't feel right, chipped away at the patience of the crew. Photographers exchanged glances. Stylists pressed their lips together. Assistants paused mid-motion. Even worse was the contradiction. Meghan wanted high-fashion editorial images, but didn't want to follow the editorial process. Have you ever met someone who wants the results, but not the requirements that create those results? Someone who demands the outcome but rejects the method? That's the contradiction that suffocated the room. That's what sparked the quiet frustration that later exploded online. Because here's the twist that no one expected. This wasn't just about refusing directions. This wasn't just about one photographer or one moment. This was the culmination of a pattern that has followed Meghan from previous shoots, previous sets, previous collaborations. A pattern many tried to dismiss as gossip until it happened again, right in front of Harper's Bazaar's editor-in-chief. Samira Nasser is not someone who acts on impulse. She is respected, admired, strategic, measured. An editor-in-chief is not supposed to intervene in a photo shoot unless something is seriously wrong. Their job is to oversee the vision, not referee disagreements. So imagine the shock when Samira had to step in personally. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because Meghan's behavior threatened the entire production. Let that sink in for a moment. When the person at the very top steps into a creative dispute, the message is unmistakable. This has gone too far. But what exactly did she witness? What did she hear? What made her allegedly take the unprecedented step of blacklisting Meghan afterward? This is where the story deepens. People inside the studio say the atmosphere shifted the moment Samira approached. Meghan smiled, that diplomatic, camera-ready smile she's perfected over the years. She explained herself in polished, beautifully articulated sentences. But the photographers didn't buy it. The stylists didn't buy it. Even assistants who usually stayed quiet sensed that something didn't add up. Here's the surprising part. Samira wasn't shocked by the chaos. She wasn't blindsided at all. She had been warned. Quietly, privately, discreetly. Another magazine had already flagged Meghan as unmanageable. Not publicly, of course. Not in a statement. Not in a headline. But behind closed doors. Through industry whisper networks. Through those invisible channels where professionals share experiences, names, and warnings to protect each other. And Samira had chosen to ignore it. To give Meghan a chance. To believe the best. To hope that this shoot would be different. That this time, the process would unfold smoothly. But it didn't. Have you ever placed trust in someone, only to watch that trust crumble in real time? That was the moment for Samira. One refusal turned into 5. 5 turned into 10. The creative direction broke down. The chemistry collapsed. And by the end of the shoot, not only were photographers frustrated, some were so fed up they reportedly refused to finish the job. Think about that. When was the last time you heard of elite fashion photographers walking away from a cover story? It doesn't happen. Not unless the situation becomes intolerable. Not unless the subject crosses an unspoken line. Not unless the editor-in-chief's patience reaches its limit. And here's the part that almost no one outside the industry understands. You don't get blacklisted in fashion for being demanding. Many stars are demanding. You don't get blacklisted for having opinions. Many stars have opinions. You don't get blacklisted for pushing back on creative decisions. Many stars push back. You get blacklisted when your behavior impacts the entire team. When you disrespect the process. When you disrupt the environment. When the cost of working with you becomes greater than the value of your presence. So the question becomes, where did this story truly begin? Was it the refusals? Was it the tension? Was it the meltdown backstage? Or was the Real beginning something far more subtle? A pattern of difficult encounters that finally reached critical mass. Because what you're about to discover is that this one shoot didn't just trigger backlash. It exposed a deeper truth about how Meghan operates behind the scenes. It peeled back a curtain the public rarely sees. And it left Harper's Bazaar with a decision that would spark quiet conversations across fashion houses, PR firms, and creative agencies around the world. This isn't just a moment. It's a shift. A shift in how the industry views Meghan Markle. A shift in how much patience top brands will give her. A shift in how professionals weigh risk versus reward. And a shift in how far an editor-in-chief is willing to go to protect her team. But to understand just how dramatic this shift was, we need to go back to the shoot. Back to the exact moment when Meghan's refusal didn't just frustrate the photographer. It ignited something much bigger. Because what happened next didn't stay in the studio. It didn't stay in the meeting room afterward. And it definitely didn't stay inside Harper's Bazaar. Someone talked. Someone leaked. Someone broke the silence that the fashion world usually guards with iron discipline. And once that happened, everything changed. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What really happens in the exact moment a photo shoot goes off the rails? Not the public version. Not the PR polished retelling. I'm talking about the real moment. The sharp inhale, the awkward silence, the stunned faces, the whispered, did she really just do that? That passes between crew members like an electric current. Because that is exactly where we're picking up. The point where Meghan Markle's refusal in that Harper's Bazaar studio didn't just disrupt the vibe, it detonated it. And here's the mini hook. What if I told you that the meltdown everyone talks about wasn't even the moment that ended the day? What if I told you that the real explosion came later, quietly, unexpectedly, and from someone you probably wouldn't expect? But before we get to that, we need to go inside that studio, into the very moment when everything started to unravel and Meghan's refusal to follow a simple direction snowballed into something far bigger than anyone anticipated. Picture this. The studio lights glowed at full power, casting that warm, diffused glow across the set, the kind of light that makes skin look expensive and shadows look cinematic. Large white reflectors ghosted against the walls. Assistants zipped back and forth adjusting cables, steamers hissed in the corner as stylists prepped a couture gown, and the lead photographer reviewed test shots on a screen the size of a small TV. It was controlled chaos, the kind of buzzing pre-shoot rhythm you only get in major editorial productions. Everyone was ready. Everyone was focused. Everyone was excited. Because this was supposed to be a career moment, a Meghan Markle feature in Harper's Bazaar, led by Samira Nasser's vision. This was prestige. This was power. This was guaranteed press. But beneath the surface, there was another emotion that no one said out loud. Tension. Heavy, slow-burning tension that lingered in the air long before the first click of the camera. Have you ever felt someone's energy change the atmosphere of a room? I'm not talking metaphorically. I mean genuinely shift the temperature, the pacing, the body language of everyone present. That's what happened the moment Meghan entered the space. She carried the aura of someone who believed she was walking into a royal portrait sitting, not a collaborative editorial environment. There was expectation in her stride, a certain sharpness to her expression. She greeted a few people politely enough, but even her courtesy felt curated, like she was still performing, still conscious of being Meghan rather than simply being a subject for the day. And immediately, the dynamic shifted. Assistants straightened up. Stylists adjusted their tone. Photographers tried to gauge how flexible she would be. And in those first few moments, no one could have predicted how quickly those questions would be answered. The first sign of trouble came with something small, almost too small to matter. The photographer, a calm, seasoned professional known for working with top-tier talent, asked Meghan to shift her weight onto her left leg. A tiny movement, a basic adjustment, something models do instinctively. But Meghan didn't. She froze. She adjusted the opposite way. Then she paused again. Then she said she preferred a different posture. The photographer tried another approach, offering a soft suggestion, a minor tweak to bring the light onto her jawline. And again, Meghan refused. Not angrily, not rudely, but firmly, definitively, with an air of finality that made the photographer blink in surprise. And this is where the contradictions began spilling out. Contradictions that shaped the entire day. Meghan wanted to look high-fashion, editorial, refined. She wanted the gravitas of a Vogue-level spread with the warmth of a lifestyle profile. But she didn't want the poses required. She didn't want the angles required. She didn't want the lighting adjustments required. It was like asking for a 3-course meal, but refusing every ingredient. And here's the emotional beat. The photographer wasn't frustrated because she pushed back. Professionals can handle pushback. They were frustrated because she pushed back without offering alternatives, without trusting the process, without acknowledging the team's expertise. Ask yourself this. Have you ever tried working with someone who wants the outcome but resists every step necessary to achieve it? Someone who says they want the final picture but refuses the path that leads there? That was the energy choking the room. At first, the crew tried to adapt. Styles were swapped. Lighting was shifted. Poses were redesigned. The photographer tried softer directions, then clearer directions, then more collaborative ones. They showed Meghan reference images, offered variations, demonstrated the angles themselves. They were trying, genuinely trying, to make her comfortable while still producing something usable. But every attempt hit a wall. Meghan didn't like the posture. She didn't like the lighting. She didn't like the framing. And yet, somehow, she still insisted that she wanted something elevated. Elevated, but not editorial. Natural, but not candid. Glamorous, but not styled. Directional, but not directed. Do you see the contradiction? It was impossible. And the more impossible it became, the more strained the atmosphere grew. Whispers started in the corners of the room. Assistants exchanged quick glances, eyebrows lifted in that universal "are you seeing this too?" expression. Stylists stepped back with folded arms, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Even makeup artists, normally calm as stone, paused mid-brush stroke, anticipating another correction from Meghan that had nothing to do with their work. Then came the breaking point. The photographer gave a final, very standard instruction. Chin slightly down, shoulders relaxed. A pose that flatters literally everyone. Meghan's response was sharp, immediate, and delivered loudly enough that people across the set heard it. "No, that's not what I want. That doesn't look like me." And there it was. The moment everything broke. Because that simple line didn't just challenge the photographer. It challenged the entire concept of the shoot. It challenged the team's expertise. It challenged the collaborative spirit. It challenged the notion that this was a professional working environment and not Meghan's personal vanity project. Have you ever seen a group expression change all at once? The collective shift from optimism to frustration? That's what happened. A stylist dropped their clipboard. An assistant froze mid-step. The photographer quietly lowered the camera. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was a rejection of the entire process. And that's when the whispers died and the silence got loud. But here's the twist. Meghan didn't seem to notice. She kept adjusting her hair. She kept fixing her sleeve. She kept offering opinions not asked for, reshaping the vibe of the set like she was the creative director rather than the subject. And slowly, the energy spilled over from frustration into something more serious, something that would later be described as the moment the shoot died. The photographer tried again, this time with a measured tone. "We can try your way, but just for a safety shot, let's do one with the angle I suggested." Meghan refused again, flat out refused. And that refusal echoed so loudly through the team that it might as well have been a door slamming. At that exact moment, someone did something unexpected, something that would trigger a chain reaction far bigger than anyone realized. But before the consequences unfolded, someone in that room decided they had had enough. Let me ask you, what would you do if the star of your shoot dismissed your professional expertise multiple times in front of the entire team? Would you stay calm? Would you pretend nothing happened? Or would you reach your breaking point? Because one person did reach that breaking point, and what they said next froze everyone in their tracks. The room froze the moment that crew member reached their breaking point. It wasn't dramatic at first, not a scream, not a confrontation, not the kind of explosion you'd expect in a Hollywood movie. It was quieter than that, sharper, the kind of quiet cut that slices deeper than yelling ever could. A low, controlled statement from a normally soft-spoken lighting technician who had spent the last hour bending over backward, crawling across the studio floor, adjusting stands, shifting reflectors, dimming and brightening panels, all to accommodate every one of Meghan's refusals. And that voice, that steady voice that never cracked under pressure, finally said what everyone else was thinking but no one dared to articulate. Then why are we here? For words. For simple, devastating words that shattered the fragile politeness holding the shoot together. Why are we here? Why is the team assembled? Why is the equipment set? Why is the magazine spending a fortune on this feature? Why are the creatives fighting to produce images when the subject rejects every attempt? The impact was immediate. Heads snapped toward the technician. Meghan blinked in shock. The photographer exhaled through clenched teeth. Assistants froze as if someone had hit pause on the entire set. And Samira Nasser's name was whispered, not because she was physically there yet, but because, suddenly, it felt like someone needed to call her. And this is where emotional tension spikes, because Meghan didn't react with anger, as some expected. She reacted with disbelief, as if the very suggestion that she was obstructing the process was outrageous. Her eyes widened for a second, then narrowed in a controlled, practiced way. That expression, quiet indignation wrapped in dignity, was the same one she had used in interviews when confronted with difficult questions. But this wasn't an interview. This wasn't a safe PR arena. This was a studio full of professionals who weren't looking for drama, weren't making accusations, weren't pushing an agenda. They just wanted to do their jobs. Have you ever watched two realities clash in the same room? Meghan's reality. Where she was protecting her image, her angles, her brand, collided with the team's reality, where she was making the shoot impossible. And the collision created a fracture that no amount of polite conversation could repair. The photographer tried to salvage the moment again. "We're all here to get the best possible images," they said gently. "And we just need your cooperation for a few frames. We'll work with your preferences afterward, but we need at least a baseline shot to build from." Meghan didn't budge. The lighting technicians stepped back, suddenly aware that their quiet mutiny had put a spotlight on them. But the damage was done. Their words still hung in the air, and now the question had expanded. It wasn't just why are we here? It was why was Meghan here if she didn't trust the team? Why did she accept the feature? Why did she agree to an editorial if she wasn't willing to participate in the editorial process? And that's when the energy shifted again. But this time for the worse. A stylist, who had been silent the entire time, finally muttered under their breath, "This is exactly what I was warned about," not expecting anyone to hear. But someone did. Actually, several people did. And that single sentence ricocheted through the room like a thrown stone. Warned? Warned about what? Warned about who? You could feel the temperature drop. Meghan straightened up. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes sharpened with the kind of defensive alertness that comes from years of public scrutiny. She wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. Not here. Not now. Not in a room she expected to command. And here's the twist. The photographer had also been warned. Quietly, discreetly, but they had chosen to give Meghan a fair chance. And now they were standing there, camera in hand, realizing that the warnings hadn't been exaggerations. They were premonitions. The mounting tension finally reached the top of the chain. A senior producer stepped onto the set, cleared their throat, and announced that they were calling a 5-minute break. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an emergency reset. A chance to regroup. A chance to breathe. A chance to prevent the situation from spiraling any further. But it was already too late. As the team dispersed, some heading to the coffee machines, others whispering in clusters, Meghan didn't leave the set. She stayed there, frozen in place, jaw tight, fingers fidgeting with the cuff of her sleeve. You could almost see the thoughts racing behind her expression. Confusion, annoyance, protectiveness, and something else, something more fragile. The fear of losing control. Let me ask you this. How does a celebrity accustomed to controlling their every image react when they realize the room no longer sees them as the center, but as the problem? Because that realization hit Meghan like a sudden cold breeze. But this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. The break didn't bring calm. It brought clarity. Quiet conversations got louder. Tension turned into frustration. And behind one of the partitions near the wardrobe racks, two stylists had a hushed exchange that changed everything for the worse. "She did the same thing during the last shoot she did in LA," one stylist whispered. "I know," the other replied. "They said she refused every pose, every angle, and then complained she didn't like any of the photos." Another contradiction, another pattern, another warning ignored. By the time the 5-minute break ended, it was obvious that the mood had shifted from strained cooperation to tense survival. The photographer approached the set with a professionally calm face, but their eyes told a different story, tired, cautious, guarded. Meghan stood waiting, arms crossed, clearly preparing to defend herself if necessary. The senior producer returned, gesturing for everyone to reset. And that's when the worst happened, something so unexpected, so humiliating, that some staff later said it was the moment they knew the shoot was doomed. Meghan gave her own direction. Not a collaborative suggestion. Not an idea offered to spark creativity. An order. "I want the lighting adjusted this way," she said, pointing. "And I don't want that lens used. It makes my face look distorted." Instant silence. Have you ever heard silence that is louder than any argument? That's what it sounded like. Because the moment she started giving technical instructions to the experts whose entire careers were built on understanding those technicalities, everything collapsed. The photographer tightened their jaw. The lighting tech looked away. The makeup artist dropped a brush. This was not confidence. This was not creative input. This was control, absolute, non-negotiable, dismissive control. And this, ironically, is where the emotional beat intensifies. Meghan wasn't trying to sabotage the shoot. She was trying to protect herself, protect her image, protect the version of herself she believed the world wanted to see. But in doing so, she undermined the very people trying to help her capture that image. She didn't see them as collaborators. She saw them as obstacles. And that misunderstanding, that fundamental disconnect, was the crack that split the day in half. The photographer finally stepped forward, their voice calm but firm. With respect, Meghan, the lighting and lens choices are part of the creative direction. That's what we're here to manage. If you don't trust our approach, we won't be able to deliver the results you want. Meghan stared at them. No blink. No softening. Just cold resistance. I'm just telling you what works for my face, she said. The silence grew heavier. Everyone knew the line had been crossed. You don't dictate technical choices to elite editors and photographers, not unless you want to spark the very backlash that was growing in real time. And then, in the most astonishing twist of the entire morning, one of the photographers quietly stepped away from the set. No announcement, no confrontation, just a simple walk-off, a refusal to continue. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat stop, because photographers don't walk off sets like this. Not without cause, not without feeling utterly disrespected. And that single walk-off created a domino effect that no one in the room could stop. Because when one photographer left, others questioned if they should follow. When stylists saw photographers walking, they questioned the entire job. When assistants saw stylists stopping, they felt the whole production unraveling. It was the moment the shoot went from salvageable to catastrophic. And the worst part? Samira Nasr still hadn't arrived. Because when she did, when she walked into that fractured, silent, chaotic studio, her entrance would send ripples through the room that even Meghan couldn't ignore. But the moment that truly changed everything, the moment that pushed this situation from difficult shoot into industry blacklist, that moment didn't happen on set. It happened right after Samira stepped inside. And what she saw changed everything, but no one saw it coming. What did Samira Nasr walk into? What did she see in that exact moment that made her expression shift from composed professionalism to a quiet, simmering fury that only those closest to her truly recognized? Because the second she stepped inside the Harper's Bazaar studio, the entire room changed. You know that feeling when someone with real authority enters? Not someone pretending, not someone posturing, but someone whose presence alone resets the air? That was Samira. Calm, sharp, observant. And the first thing she noticed wasn't the equipment, or the lighting, or the half-finished set. It was the energy, the frozen tension, the uncomfortable stillness of a room that had completely stopped functioning. And then she saw Meghan. Not posing, not collaborating, not adjusting herself for the next shot. No. She saw Meghan holding her own private conference in the middle of the set, arms crossed, face tight, giving firm, pointed instructions to a cluster of staff members who were clearly uncomfortable. They weren't nodding in agreement, they were nodding in fear, in confusion, in an effort to avoid confrontation. This was not a star working with a creative team. This was a star trying to command one. And that visual, Meghan at the center, the team orbiting around her like uneasy satellites, set off every alarm bell Samira had ignored in the days leading up to the shoot. Because here's the twist you didn't see coming. This wasn't the first time Samira had heard about Meghan's creative control tendencies. It wasn't even the first time she had heard about refusal of direction. There were stories, quiet ones, shared privately among editors, stylists, and producers who had learned the hard way that Meghan's desire for control didn't always stop at wanting influence. Sometimes it escalated into overpowering the entire process. But Samira had made the choice to give Meghan a fresh slate, a clean start, a new beginning. And now she was staring at the exact behavior she had hoped and prayed was exaggerated gossip. Have you ever had a moment where you realized the warnings you dismissed weren't warnings, they were predictions? Because Samira was having that moment right then. She took in the room with quick, precise attention. The photographers clustered in the corner, the stylists whispering anxiously near the garment racks, the makeup artists exchanging glances, and Meghan, who was explaining, in great detail, how she believed the shoot should be run, what lighting should be used, which lenses were flattering, and why she thought her preferred angles were more aligned with Harper's Bazaar's editorial style. Editorial style? The irony was staggering. Meghan was lecturing Harper's Bazaar about Harper's Bazaar. Samira approached calmly, her steps quiet but decisive. How is everything going? she asked, though the answer was written all over the room. Silence. Not respectful silence. Terrified silence. That was the moment Samira knew. The moment she realized the problem wasn't the team. The problem wasn't the creative direction. The problem wasn't the photographer. The problem was that Meghan had taken over the shoot. And the team, trained professionals with years of experience, were being treated like props in Meghan's personal branding exercise. Samira's presence didn't go unnoticed by Meghan. She turned immediately, adjusting her posture into something more diplomatic. You could practically see the transformation, the press-ready smile, the softening of her voice, the shift in tone from commanding to collaborative. "Oh, Samira, so glad you're here," Meghan said, gesturing toward the lighting equipment. "We're just discussing some adjustments. I'm not sure the angles are bringing out the story we want." The story we want. That phrase hit the photographer like a slap. Because the story belonged to Harper's Bazaar, not Meghan's personal brand. And Samira knew it. "What story are we trying to achieve?" Samira asked calmly, testing the waters. Meghan launched into a long explanation. Airy, abstract, beautifully phrased, but ultimately empty. Words about empowerment and authenticity and capturing her essence. It was vague enough to sound profound, yet specific enough to override the creative direction. It was exactly the kind of phrasing celebrities use in interviews, not the kind professionals use during production. Samira listened. Patiently. Professionally. But the longer she listened, the stronger her suspicion grew. Meghan wasn't trying to collaborate. She was trying to reshape the shoot into something entirely different, something she could control from top to bottom. Have you ever watched someone smile politely while internally reaching their limit? That was Samira. But here's where the emotional beat hits deeper, and where the contradictions begin piling up like dominoes. Because while Meghan spoke about empowerment, she simultaneously dismissed the empowered professionals around her. While she spoke about authenticity, nothing about her manner felt authentic. While she spoke about capturing her essence, she refused every technique needed to reveal it. And while she positioned herself as a champion of collaboration, she was the one derailing the collaboration entirely. Samira took a breath and glanced at the photographer. The look exchanged between them said everything. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontational. It was resigned, exhausted. And that's when Samira made the decision that would shape the rest of the shoot, and ultimately, shape the aftermath. She stepped closer to Meghan and said, gently but firmly, "Let's let the team do what they do best." It was a perfectly neutral sentence. Calm, professional, polite. But in an environment where tension was stretched to its breaking point, it sounded like a command. Meghan blinked. The smile flickered. Not gone, not yet, but strained. "Oh, of course," she said. "I just wanted to make sure we're aligned." Aligned. Aligned was the polite way of saying in charge. Samira nodded, but she had already made her assessment. And now she needed proof for herself. So she did something subtle, something no one else realized the significance of in the moment. She asked the photographer to run through the original plan shots. A test. A reset. A return to the professional process. The photographer agreed immediately. The team repositioned themselves. Assistants resumed their roles, still wary but relieved to have direction again. And then it happened. The moment that confirmed every concern Samira had. The photographer lifted the camera. The lighting tech adjusted the panel. The shoot was ready to restart. And Meghan refused again. Not politely. Not gently. Not quietly. She refused with that same hardened firmness she had used earlier. "No. That angle doesn't work for me. I told you, I don't do chin-down shots." And there it was. The refusal. The defiance. The dismissal of direction in front of Samira. If Meghan had refused before, Samira could have chalked it up to tension, misunderstanding, nerves, even insecurity. But refusing in front of the editor-in-chief? That was something else entirely. Something that wasn't just about discomfort or preference. Something that pointed to a deeper issue, a pattern. A pattern that didn't begin today. A pattern that didn't start at Harper's Bazaar. A pattern that had followed Meghan from project to project. And Samira saw it in real time. What happened next unfolded slowly, almost in slow motion, but the consequences were enormous. The photographer exhaled. The stylist pressed their lips together. The senior producer caught Samira's eye with a look that asked without asking, "Do you see it now?" And Samira did. But the moment that truly shifted the dynamic came from someone unexpected, a junior photographer's assistant, no older than 25, standing near the tripod, whispering to another assistant just a bit too loudly. She did this at L2. And that whisper was the spark. Because it wasn't gossip. It wasn't an insult. It was confirmation. A previous magazine had dealt with the same behavior. Samira turned sharply toward the assistants. Her expression didn't change. Samira was far too composed for that. But her eyes narrowed with new understanding. This wasn't a one-off moment. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't nerves. This was a pattern repeating itself. And the realization hit her with the weight of unwelcome truth. But the turning point, the moment that sealed the rest of the day, came seconds later when Meghan made a mistake that stunned even those who had already lost patience. She looked at Samira and said, with absolute calm, "Maybe they're not experienced enough for what I'm trying to achieve." A line that sucked the air out of the room. Experienced enough? These were some of the top editorial creatives in the industry. It was the single sentence that transformed frustration into something else, something closer to collective outrage. And that sentence was the exact moment Samira decided everything that would come next. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Experienced enough. Those two words didn't just hang in the air, they poisoned it. The room didn't react all at once. Instead, the reaction rippled outward in slow, stunned waves. A breath caught in someone's throat. A makeup brush paused midair. A stylist's hand froze on the hem of a designer dress. Even the photographer, normally unbothered, composed, and steady, tilted their head as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. Because Meghan Markle, standing in the middle of a Harper's Bazaar set surrounded by award-winning professionals, had just implied the entire staff was beneath the caliber she required. And Samira Nasser heard every syllable. Have you ever been in a room where the wrong person said the wrong thing at the exact wrong time? Where the entire atmosphere changes with one misplaced sentence? That's what this was. That sentence wasn't a critique. It wasn't feedback. It wasn't even a complaint. It was something far sharper, a dismissal, a complete rejection of the team's expertise, a subtle accusation that the failure of the shoot, the tension, the refusals, the misalignment, wasn't due to Meghan's behavior, but due to the incompetence of the people standing right in front of her. And it was the moment Samira realized this wasn't going to end in adjustments or compromise or smoothing things over. This was going to end in consequences. Meghan didn't realize it yet, not fully. She was still speaking with the calm, polished cadence of someone who believed she had made a valid point. "I'm just saying," she continued, "if the lighting is going to be this harsh, it's not going to work. I know what looks good on camera. I know my angles. I've been doing this for years. But here's the contradiction that slapped every professional in the room. The lighting wasn't harsh. The lens wasn't unflattering. The angle wasn't incorrect. These creatives knew what they were doing. They had done it for some of the most acclaimed, high-profile names in the world. They weren't amateurs. They weren't novices. They didn't need Meghan to explain their craft. Yet here she was, explaining it anyway, with the conviction of someone who had convinced herself that expertise is optional when you're famous. Have you ever met someone who confuses confidence with qualification? Someone who mistakes personal preference for universal truth? That was the tension boiling in the studio now. But Samira? She wasn't emotional. She wasn't reactive. She wasn't flustered. She watched with a kind of chilling, thoughtful clarity, the expression of a leader calculating the full picture before making a decision. And the full picture was getting uglier by the second. The photographer finally spoke, voice calm, but with the edge of someone who had reached their limit. "We've produced some of Harper's Bazaar's most iconic covers," they said. "We understand how lighting works. We understand angles. All we're asking is your cooperation so we can achieve the vision the magazine approved." That last part, the magazine approved, carried weight. It was a reminder. The creative vision belonged to the publication, not Meghan. But if Meghan caught the meaning, she didn't show it. Instead, she replied with something that pushed the room past its breaking point. "Well, maybe the vision needs to be adjusted if it isn't flattering." And that was the shift. Not subtle. Not debatable. Not salvageable. Because she wasn't rejecting a pose. She wasn't rejecting a lighting setup. She was rejecting the magazine's entire creative authority. Samira took one step forward. Just one. But the movement was enough to snap the entire room back to attention. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reprimand Meghan. She simply said, "Let's take another short pause," in a tone that left no room for interpretation. This wasn't a pause for Meghan. This was a pause for Samira. She turned and walked toward the corridor just outside the set. The senior producer followed. Behind them, two stylists exchanged looks that said everything without speaking. When Samira stops a shoot, it means something serious is happening. What do you think they talked about in that corridor? What decision was being considered? What line had just been crossed? Because none of this, absolutely none of this, was normal. While they stepped away, the room shifted into a quiet, uneasy drift. Meghan stood alone for a moment, adjusting the sleeve of her top, smoothing her hair, rehearsing a calm expression. But everyone else kept their distance. Not out of disrespect, out of emotional self-preservation. They were drained, spiritually drained, drained by the constant pushback, drained by the attempts to appease her, drained by the repeated refusals that kept resetting the shoot back to zero. And here's the emotional twist. Some of them actually felt bad for feeling frustrated. They didn't want to dislike Meghan. They didn't come into the day expecting conflict. Many of them admired her, or at least respected her platform. But admiration and respect can only survive so long when it collides with behavior that bulldozes the boundaries of a creative team. Meghan didn't seem to see that. Or maybe she did. Maybe that's why her expression kept slipping. The faint tightening of the jaw, the subtle shift in her stance, the flicker of tension around her eyes. She was losing her grip on the narrative unfolding in real time. And then, the ironic twist, the whisper that exposed far more than people intended. Near the wardrobe racks, two makeup assistants were restocking products when one murmured, "This is just like the story from the LA shoot." They didn't mean for anyone to hear. But someone did. Someone who took a sharp breath. Someone who realized this wasn't an isolated issue. This was a pattern. A long pattern. A repeating pattern. And patterns have consequences. Samira re-entered the studio like a judge returning to the courtroom. Calm. Precise. Eyes scanning every corner of the room. But now, something had shifted in her demeanor. She wasn't observing anymore. She was deciding. "We're going to simplify the next part of the shoot," she announced. "We'll follow the original shot list for now and review adjustments afterward." A diplomatic way of saying, "We're going back to the plan, no more improvising." Meghan's smile was tight. "Of course," she said, but her tone had an edge. The team resumed their positions. The photographer lifted the camera again. The lighting tech adjusted the panel. The senior producer gave a quiet nod. Everyone braced for impact. Shoulders relaxed. The photographer said, "No." Meghan replied immediately. "That makes me look slouched." Chin slightly down. "No. Turn your body 3 degrees to the left. That angle doesn't work for me." Every refusal chipped away at the team's patience. Every refusal confirmed Samira's fear. Every refusal strengthened the pattern. And finally, after the 7th refusal in a row, the photographer lowered their camera and said something that would be repeated in private industry circles for months afterward. "I can't work like this." The room collapsed into stunned silence. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." You have to understand, photographers do not say this. Not openly. Not in front of an editor-in-chief. Not during a feature of a major public figure. But exhaustion had beaten professionalism. Respect had been replaced by frustration. And patience had been stretched past its breaking point. Meghan looked genuinely shocked. For the first time all day, she didn't have a rehearsed response. Her lips parted, once, then twice, as if she was searching for the right words but couldn't find them fast enough. And Samira? Samira's expression didn't change. But her silence spoke volumes. It told the room that she heard the photographer. It told the room that she understood. It told the room that something had to be done. But the moment that truly sealed Meghan's fate, the moment that pushed this situation from difficult celebrity shoot into industry reckoning, happened seconds later. One of the stylists, a veteran of 2 decades, murmured to Samira, "This isn't the first time this has happened with her." Samira turned slowly. "What do you mean?" And the stylist said it plainly, quietly, but clearly enough that half the room heard. "She's been like this on every shoot I've seen her on. It's always a battle. Always. A battle. Not sometimes. Not occasionally. Always." The truth finally surfaced. The pattern was undeniable, and Samira realized something she had been resisting all morning. This wasn't going to get better. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was who Meghan was on set. But before Samira could respond, before she could ask another question or call another break, someone new walked into the studio. Someone whose presence would flip the entire day upside down. And what that person said next, nobody saw coming. Who walked in? Who had the kind of presence, the kind of authority that instantly cut through the tension like a blade through silk? Not a stylist, not an assistant, not a photographer returning in silent protest. No. The person who stepped into the room was Harper's Bazaar's director of photography, a veteran with a reputation so respected, so quietly powerful within the fashion world, that even the most confident celebrities usually softened when he arrived. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to assert dominance. His very presence asserted it for him, and he walked onto the set with an expression that made everyone, every assistant, every stylist, every photographer, straighten up instantly. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was concern. Concern meant trouble. Concern meant someone had already sent a message. Concern meant he had been informed, and likely by someone high up. He looked at the photographer first, then at the senior producer, and then his eyes landed on Samira. He didn't speak right away, but the tightness in his jaw and the slight narrowing of his eyes said enough. He knew something was wrong, very wrong, and Meghan felt it. She felt it instantly. Her posture stiffened. Her expression shifted. The diplomatic smile returned. Tight, slightly too bright. The kind of smile that says I'm still in control, right? She attempted to greet him. "Oh, hi," she said with her soft, polished warmth. "We were just talking about how to get the best shots." But he didn't smile back. Instead, he looked at Samira and asked quietly, "Do you want to handle this? Do you want to handle this?" 6 words that changed the tone of the room. Because normally, if there was a small miscommunication, the creative director would resolve it. If there was a disagreement between the photographer and the subject, he would step in to mediate. If there was tension, he would smooth it. But this question, "Do you want to handle this?" meant one thing. This wasn't a technical issue. This wasn't a lighting problem. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a personnel problem, a Meghan problem, and it was being escalated directly to the top. Samira nodded once, calm but firm, and when she stepped forward, the entire studio went silent. Utterly silent. People held breaths they didn't realize they were holding. The photographer lowered their camera. The stylists paused in their movements. Even the assistants who had been whispering earlier stopped mid-sentence. This was it. The moment. The turning point. Samira approached Meghan with a steady, controlled calm. Not hostile, not aggressive, but unmistakably authoritative. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, but it was the softness of leadership, not appeasement. "Meghan," she began, "I want to understand what you're trying to achieve with these adjustments." This wasn't a question. It was a test. A psychological one. She gave Meghan a chance, one last chance, to explain herself in a way that aligned with professionalism, collaboration, and respect for the crew. But Meghan stepped straight into the trap. She exhaled, relieved that she finally had the floor. "I'm just trying to ensure the photos represent me accurately," she said. "I know what angles work for me. I've done a lot of shoots, and I just feel like the team isn't understanding the look I'm going for." There it was. The misstep. The fatal misinterpretation. Because in trying to defend herself, she confirmed exactly what Samira was assessing. Meghan wasn't collaborating. She was overriding. She wasn't contributing. She was controlling. She wasn't trusting the team. She was dismissing them. And Samira's expression shifted, just slightly. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. Recognition. Recognition that Meghan saw the creative team not as partners, but as obstacles. Recognition that this wasn't a temporary conflict. It was a deeply rooted pattern. Recognition that the warnings she had dismissed were accurate. Recognition that today was not salvageable. And then, the surprising twist. Before Samira could respond, the creative director, the one who had just entered, addressed Meghan directly in a tone that no one expected. "We've worked with world-class models and celebrities," he said, voice steady and respectful but firm. "We understand lighting, angles, posture, composition. Our team is here to create something beautiful with you, but not for you. If you don't trust us, We can't do our jobs. That's when the silence turned suffocating. Meghan blinked in disbelief. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that, especially not in front of an entire room. Especially not by someone with creative authority. Her lips parted. Her eyebrows lifted. You could see the exact moment she realized the room wasn't supporting her. The team wasn't defending her. Even Samira wasn't shielding her. She was alone. And in an industry driven by collaboration, being alone is the most dangerous position of all. But before she could respond, before she could attempt to regain control, one of the photographers added something that pushed the situation over the edge. She doesn't trust us. She's refused every direction. That was it. The final confirmation. Because once a team publicly communicates that they can't work with a subject, leadership has to make a decision. And Samira made one. She stepped forward with quiet authority and said, "Let's take a moment in private." There was no room for debate. No room for negotiation. No room for persuasion. The senior producer gestured to Meghan. The studio watched in stunned silence as Meghan followed Samira toward a private conference room just outside the set. And here's where the emotional twist intensifies. As Meghan walked away, the room didn't relax. It didn't exhale. It didn't recover. It collapsed into whispers. Rapid, emotional whispers. That was unbelievable. She talked down to the entire team. "I've never seen a shoot go this badly." She refused everything. This is exactly what happened at Vogue. She can't keep doing this. A pattern, spoken aloud, shared openly, repeated by multiple creatives, now existed in the room. And Samira heard every whisper as she closed the conference room door behind her. But the most shocking revelation, the one that would expose just how long this pattern had been forming, wasn't whispered in the studio. It was said behind that closed door, in a private conversation between Meghan Markle and Samira Nasser. And what Meghan said in that room would be the moment everything snapped. The conference room door clicked shut with a finality that startled even Meghan. It wasn't slammed. It wasn't pulled aggressively. It was simply closed. Quietly. Deliberately. And yet that single sound carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. Because behind that door, the atmosphere shifted from chaotic to controlled. From public to private. From collaborative to confrontational. Though neither woman had spoken a single word yet. Meghan stood near the center of the room, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, as if preparing to defend herself. Samira took a moment before speaking, a pause designed not to intimidate, but to assess, to measure, to let the silence work in her favor. Because silence, used correctly, is more powerful than any argument. When Samira finally spoke, her voice was low, steady, and almost impossibly calm for someone who had just walked into a professional disaster. "Do you understand what's happening out there?" she asked. A simple question. A loaded one. A test disguised as concern. Meghan swallowed. The confident veneer crackled. But only for a moment. She recovered quickly, smoothing her hair behind her ear in that practiced gesture she often used in interviews. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she replied. "I was just trying to communicate my needs. The lighting was unflattering, the angles weren't working, and I don't feel like the team is listening to me." There it was again. The contradiction. The blind spot. Meghan truly believed she was communicating. But Samira knew she was controlling. Samira tilted her head slightly. A tiny movement, but an unmistakable one. "They are listening," she said. "They've been listening all morning. But listening doesn't mean they can ignore their expertise. It's their job to guide the creative direction, not yours." Meghan stiffened. For the first time, genuine defensiveness flashed across her face. "But I know what looks good on me," she said, her voice tightening. "I've done dozens of shoots. I know my angles. I know how lighting affects my features. I know my image better than anyone." That last line hit Samira harder than Meghan realized. "I know my image better than anyone." Because that was the truth. The raw, unfiltered truth beneath the entire problem. Meghan wasn't trying to collaborate. She was trying to curate. She viewed the shoot not as an editorial creation, but as an extension of her personal brand. And editorial teams don't create personal branding content. They create stories. They create art. They create cultural moments. They do not create marketing material disguised as magazine spreads. "You do know your image," Samira admitted. "But you don't know ours." A sentence that landed like a revelation. Meghan blinked. What do you mean? Samira stepped forward, her tone still calm but charged with clarity. Harper's Bazaar has a voice, a vision, a style. Our editors, photographers, and stylists have spent years developing that. Our readers expect it. When you override the professionals, you're not just rejecting them. You're rejecting the magazine. For a brief moment, Meghan faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her expression. A question that she didn't dare speak aloud. Was she really rejecting the magazine? But it vanished just as quickly as it came. She straightened again. I'm not rejecting the magazine, she insisted. I'm trying to ensure the photos feel authentic to me. And that word, authentic, nearly made Samira laugh. Not because it was wrong, but because it was tragically ironic. Authenticity cannot be controlled. Authenticity cannot be micromanaged. Authenticity cannot be manufactured through demands. But Meghan didn't see that, or couldn't see that, or refused to see that. Samira changed her approach. She shifted from editorial explanation to direct confrontation. The team feels disrespected, she said plainly. Your refusals, your corrections, your instructions, they aren't coming off as collaboration. They're coming off as control. And that's not how this works. Meghan's reaction was immediate, defensive, emotional, sharp. I'm not trying to control anything, she said, her voice rising before she forced it back down. I'm trying to protect myself. Every time I trust a team, the photos come out wrong. I'm tired of being photographed in ways that don't reflect who I am. That was it. The truth behind the behavior. The psychology behind the refusals. It wasn't just about control. It was about fear. Fear of being misrepresented. Fear of being criticized. Fear of being memed, mocked, misunderstood. Fear of losing control of the narrative, something that had defined her public life for years. But here's the twist that cracked the room open. Fear does not excuse disrespect. And Samira, compassionate as she was, understood the difference. Meghan, she said gently, we're not your adversaries. Meghan's eyes widened. I never said you were. You didn't have to, Samira replied. Silence. Thick, heavy, unavoidable. And then Samira delivered the line that shifted the entire conversation. The one that cut through every defense Meghan had built around herself that morning. This isn't the first time this has happened. Meghan froze. Her face went still. Her breath paused. Her expression emptied in shock. What do you mean? She asked carefully. Samira didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't soften it. She didn't hide the truth behind diplomatic phrasing. I've spoken with other editors, she said. Other creative directors. Other photographers. And I now understand that today isn't an isolated experience. This is a pattern. The word pattern hit Meghan like a physical blow. Because a pattern means repetition. A pattern means consistency. A pattern means responsibility. A pattern. Meghan whispered, the confidence draining from her voice. Who said that? Who's been talking about me? And that question, who's been talking about me, revealed something even deeper than Samira expected. Meghan wasn't concerned that she had a pattern. She wasn't concerned that she had hurt the team. She wasn't concerned that her behavior was affecting the shoot. She was concerned about reputation, about optics, about perception, about what the industry was saying behind her back. Samira stepped closer, lowering her voice. People aren't gossiping, she said. They're warning each other. And not because they want to tear you down, because they want to protect their teams. Meghan's breath hitched. This was the emotional rupture point. The moment where the facade cracked. For the first time all day, her expression wasn't defensive or dismissive or controlled. It was raw. You think I'm difficult, she said quietly. Samira didn't respond immediately. That's what people think, Meghan whispered again. That I'm a diva. That I'm demanding. That I'm impossible. Samira's silence was the answer. But the most devastating moment came when Meghan asked the question that no one expected from someone who had spent the entire day in control. Is that why the photographer walked out? Samira nodded once. Meghan exhaled shakily, her eyes glistening with frustration, not sadness, not regret, frustration. Frustration that her behavior had consequences she couldn't control. Frustration that the narrative was slipping from her grasp. Frustration that her image, the thing she valued most, was under threat. But what she said next was the moment that everything truly snapped. Because instead of acknowledging the pattern, or apologizing, or even trying to reset the day, Meghan said something that stunned Samira into silence. A sentence so breathtakingly misjudged that it sealed everything that would follow. If they can't work with someone like me, maybe they're not cut out for this industry. The room went cold. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't entitlement. It was something worse. A complete inability to see herself as part of the problem. And that was the moment Samira made her decision. Not an emotional decision. A professional one. A protective one. She knew the shoot could not continue. She knew the tension could not be repaired. She knew the team could not be disrespected again. And she knew the magazine could not afford another controversy. But the decision she made next, the one Meghan never saw coming, wouldn't just end the shoot. It would end Harper's Bazaar's willingness to work with her. Quietly. Permanently. And the first step of that decision happened the moment Samira opened the conference room door and saw something outside that made her expression harden even more.